Which punishment, either real or imagined, sounds light or not a big deal at first, but is actually horrific to experience. Goat licking. In medieval times you would get your feet strapped between two wooden boards and they'd be sprinkled in salt, or similar, so animals, mainly goats, would lick them. Seems like it'd tickle at first but they won't stop licking. Apparently they'd lick flesh off until they hit bones. Closing your hand around a chunk of salt water ice, and holding it there, dubbed the Salt and Ice Challenge, where people hold onto it for as long as they can stand. It can lead to frostbite injuries similar to second and third degree burns. It also essentially fuses to your skin, so if you try to open your hand it will rip off skin. You need to use warm water to detach it. I did this about 20 years ago, before it was a thing on social media. It sucks. Tickling. No joke. The Nazis used this as a form of torture in some cases. It doesn't leave a mark, so it's also used in environments like mental facilities where patients may be restrained and staff go on a power trip. Extreme cases can result in incontinence, vomiting and a loss of consciousness due to the inability to breathe. It's also easier for the torturer to do it for a long time without it wearing away at their conscience because the victim is involuntarily laughing, so it's easy to pretend that it's not that bad. Getting away with a crime by pleading insanity. Instead of a definite custodial sentence you get an indefinite custodial sentence in an underfunded and terrifying medical facility, maybe for the rest of your life. Yay. Solitary confinement. You'd think that isolating certain people can be good for society, but in the end it screws up your mind so bad lots of people come out worse than when they went in. Wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. It's weird seeing it used so casually in so many prison shows and documentaries. Like, oh, you caused some trouble, that's a week in solitary for you. But in a lot of countries solitary confinement is literally banned because of how inhumane it is. Isolation. There's a reason solitary confinement is considered a form of torture. The human mind isn't designed to function in an environment devoid of stimulation or social interaction. It was cool going to Alcatraz and doing the audio tour. You go into one of the solitary confinement cells, with the door closed behind you. It's pitch black, and while you're in there, you hear stories from inmates, dramatically read about what it was like, and how some of them would focus their mind until they could see a tiny speck, and within that they could conjure an imaginary television screen, and see moving images, help them to stop going crazy. Has anyone seen that Black Mirror White Christmas episode? Imagine being locked in a room with nothing, like, really nothing, and all you have is endless boredom. That's horrifying. Painting rocks. A couple of guys in my 8th unit got in trouble. The sadistic drill sergeant tried being creative with an approved punishment, which was painting rocks. As dumb as a punishment it is. The sadistic side was that this training unit was in southern Arizona during peak summer temperatures. The rocks were literally hot enough to fry an egg on, and both privates' hands ended up being covered with second-degree burns. The drill sergeant faced pretty heavy administrative action. I don't recall exactly what, but it probably one of the most severe I had ever heard a drill sergeant receive. When visiting Africa, we learned that some places have their own form of lethal injection for criminals. By snakebite, rapists and murderers would be forced to receive a bite on both ankles from a puff adder. After officials verified the bites, they'd be sent home, under supervision, to spend their last days with their family. Some people thought it sounded like a more humane form, but it's not. Chinese water drop torture. Victims were strapped down so that they could not move, and cold or warm water was then dripped slowly onto a small area of the body, usually the forehead. The forehead was found to be the most suitable point for this form of torture because of its sensitivity. Prisoners could see each drop coming, and after long durations were gradually driven frantic as a perceived hollow would form in the center of the forehead. When I was around 10 years old, being forced to stand in the corner of the living room with my parents and siblings in the room and stare at the wall for hours. I remember a TV show once that suggested timeouts be 1 minute long for every year old the kid was. Not sure if that's based on any science, but it seemed reasonable to me. But I also can imagine giving my 10-year-old a timeout. I'm stretching the definition of light here by a long way, but when I heard of death by 1,000 cuts I thought I would be someone giving you a bunch of cuts until you bleed out, painful, bit extreme, but the reality is so much worse. Turns out cuts is a bit of a mistranslation, and it should really be slices. The executioner slices big chunks off your body systematically, up to muscles and whole limbs, with the aim of keeping you alive as long as possible. There are a handful of pictures of the process being done which are just about the most horrific thing I have ever seen. That farm pit punishment they used to use in Eastern Europe, where the criminal is made to stand in a pit on a hog farm for a day, which starts out empty, but then the hog manure pours in with them as the hags produce it. I'm always shocked by the number of people who consider it better than jail etc. when it's brought up, just because it's only a day. Standing at parade rest without being able to talk for 5 hours. In basic training, someone got caught stealing food from the fact no more than 20 minutes after we had been yelled at for people doing that. As a punishment, we stood at parade rest from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. without being able to talk and with at least one DS watching us at all times. I don't know how to describe it, but your brain can only come up with so much to do for 5 hours while not moving. My cousin, 10-year-old, quite agile, never sits still. Once he troubled my aunt so much that she punished him. His punishment was to sit still on the bed and do nothing. No TV, no playing either on phone or with his toys, not even speaking. No one was allowed to come to his room so that he even can't watch others. He asked her to read his textbook as he thought studying would lessen her anger, but she denied even studying. He had to sit completely still. Initially that punishment seemed quite simple to me, but what impact it had on a small child was huge. This punishment tortures you by boring you, which a small child can't take. At last he broke down crying, after which he was pardoned. Waterboarding. If any of you kids don't know, this was a big debate back in the early 2000s. Some people were calling it torture, others were more or less like it's literally just pouring water on someone's face. What's the big deal? Now, when you put it like that, yeah, what's the big deal? Take someone, make them lay down and hold them down so they can't move, pour water on their face. What's the big deal? I remember one conservative radio host got the bright idea to prove live and on the air that it's not as bad as they are saying by having his staff waterboard him on air. And you know what? I respect this guy for doing this. He had a strongly held belief and he was willing to go through it to try and prove his point. He lasted all of 15 seconds before he taped out of it, hacked and coughed for about 5 seconds, and finally managed to say definitely torture before suggesting they go to a break so he can recover from that. Good on him for admitting he was wrong. Having to play with chicken. My grandpa always told me, when the neighbor's kid would misbehave, 100 years plus since then, his parents would lock him into the chicken habitat and put some liquid and/or meat on his feet. The chickens would peck at his feet and he would have to flee constantly until he was too tired to. Then he would be released. It's kinda lost its sting from overexposure, but crucifixion is one of the most agonizingly deaths humankind has ever come up with. Just the muscle cramps alone from staying in one position for hours is enough to put it in the running, and the constant near strangulation competing with the pain from the nails is probably the main draw. White room torture. Everything white, tasteless, no sound, room temperature kept at body temperature, if I remember correctly, just a bed, toilet, water and food, nothing that could be used in any way to alleviate the boredom. It doesn't seem that big at first, just nothing to do for a while. But it's in truth some of the worst torture one can experience. There was a sauce video on this a few years ago where Michael put himself in this exact scenario for a few days to investigate the effects of isolation on the human mind. Really opened my eyes up to just how delicate the human mind is when it comes to social connectivity with other human beings and just how much isolation can throw us off. Link for anyone interested, I highly recommend it. Since you said imaginary, there was a punishment shown on Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, that Black Mirror copied a couple times, and science fiction has used as a concept, likely before DS9. The concept is time dilation, the idea that time takes place at a different rate in the real world than it does in some other. So for the punishment, the character Miles O'Brien was strapped in a chair for an hour and sedated. And he dreamed he served a 10-year prison sentence, or maybe it was longer, but in his mind, he was trapped in this cell for years and years. In the dream, he may have been deprived of food, he was definitely deprived of social interaction, but at the end of it, he woke up, and only an hour had passed. Actually, the best Next Generation episode, The Inner Light, played with time dilation as well. Same with the best Voyager episode, Blink of an Eye. Time. People underestimate the impact of duration of a sentence. In the US, it's not uncommon to hear in the news that someone received a 1-year sentence for such and such crime and thinking, wow, that's so short, they'll be out in no time. The numbers just seem so abstract and we forget just how vast even a single year is. Even for minor offenses, something like 30 days can be quite large. Imagine the impact on a person for having their life interrupted for an entire month. That will cost most people their jobs. Sentence durations are pretty arbitrary and many of them are just the way they are because historically that is the duration that was expected. Any changes are relatively minor. The truth is that modern sentences in the US are among the longest in the world and disproportionately large. When my grandmother was in Auschwitz, the Nazis used to make girls sing for them. Being forced to sing for the very same people that threw your mother, father, sisters and brothers into the gas chambers is a horrific thing. My friend once proposed a punishment for animal abusers, sort of as a joke. They'd be locked in a small cell for a few days, which is then pumped full of the heavy smell of dog breath. Apparently most people, including me, thought that sounded very light for the crime, until asked to actually visualize it. When I did, I literally gagged at the thought. In my home country, the penalty for rape and drug trafficking is whipping, with no limit, specific number to be set by the judge. First they clinically clear you for the punishment, then they get you in a bent-over pose while your ass is visible through a wooden frame. The torturer, a man in a legit hood, shows up and dips a horsewhip in medicine. The medicine serves two purposes. Firstly, it helps with slight healing during the whipping, in order to allow the prisoner more lashes during that sitting, and secondly because the medicine is sticky, causing the whip to stick into your flesh from the ass whenever it cracks. There's a very old video of it being carried out on a rapist on YouTube. Famine walls. This was something I had never heard of until I took a trip to Ireland and saw them firsthand. These were famine walls and they were built during the famine of the 1840s as a means to keep the hungry masses out of the estates of the landowners. We learned it was the usually homeless Catholics who built the walls, for a few scraps to eat. According to our guide, massive, largely pointless work projects like the famine walls and the famine roads kept the masses barely alive during the 4 years that the potato crop failed. The British rule had proclaimed that the poor had to work for sustenance and not be given charity. Just think about how demoralizing this would be, day after day, building stone walls with zero purpose just to earn your bread and soup for the day. The shocking thing is the scope of the famine walls. They're literally everywhere on the countryside as far as you can see. My teenage cousin wanted a government town summer job where he could work out and work on his stand all day. My uncle was pissed at him for thinking all government jobs are cushy, sit on your butt, and do nothing, so my uncle for him a job as a gravedigger in the local cemetery. He was in the sun all day and got tons of exercise. My teenage cousin wanted a government town summer job where he could work out and work on his stand all day. My uncle was pissed at him for thinking all government jobs are cushy, sit on your butt, and do nothing, so my uncle for him a job as a gravedigger in the local cemetery. He was in the sun all day and got tons of exercise. Outlawry. To be declared an outlaw today, we think of an outlaw as just anybody who breaks the law regularly. Back in the day, though, it was a punishment. If you were declared outlaw, that meant that you were literally outside of the law and could claim no protection from it. If someone didn't like you, they could freely beat you, rob you, torture you, or even kill you. When the stories refer to Robin Hood as an outlaw, that's what they're talking about. It's not a romantic, heroic, swashbuckling thing. It's the state of having no claim to any legal protection at all. The king, or whoever he appoints, takes your land. Anybody who wants it can take your stuff, and anybody who doesn't like you can just beat you to death without consequences. They can also put a bounty on your head and have people hunting you to claim it. What do you think would happen if you lost all protection from the law, and anybody who brought your head to the courthouse could claim a year's salary as a reward? I don't know if someone has mentioned it in here before, but silent treatment, stonewalling, especially coming from a loved one, creates a terrible imbalance in the relationship and a serious psychological trauma on the stonewalled individual. No one should ever choose this method to punish the other. Any punishment where, even if it doesn't physically harm the person, you make them do it for a long time. I was punished at a very young age, somewhere between 7 and 10, for not being manly, so my stepfather, bastard of all time, decided to toughen me up. He sat me down on the sofa, and told me, under no circumstances was I allowed to leave the sofa. If I needed the toilet I was to tell him and he would let me go to the bathroom, but if I took longer than a few minutes, he would come in, to make sure I wasn't hiding. Now that doesn't sound so bad, sitting on the sofa. P.S.H. That wasn't my punishment. My punishment to toughen me up was I was to sit on the sofa, not moving, and not allowed to look away, and he put on horror movie after horror movie after horror movie, all day, from morning to my bedtime, and these were 80s horror movies: Prince of Darkness, Poltergeist, Hellraiser, Night of the Demons, The Evil Dead, not the sequels, the Living Dead films. I love horror now that I am an adult, but for little kid me, I literally couldn't sleep properly or speak for a week. And I'm pretty sure I'm mentally messed up in some ways, but that was just an example of how much of an utter, and I'm sorry Americans, cunt this fucker was. My dad is the king of cruel and unusual punishments. He forced me and my brother to drink pint after pint of water without allowing us to use the toilet, made me run up and down stairs when I was 9 for hours on end until I confessed to something I didn't do. Those sound bad until you actually do it. Whiteness, literally being surrounded by nothing in a pure white room listening to white noise all day. It seems calm, peaceful after a while, right? Well, after a while you lose sense of other colors, emotions, you forget who you are, and it's very hard to recover. You never get used to it. It's very hard to be in the real world afterwards after being stripped of all versions of reality for months on end. This is what they did in the Middle East for a while. Wrapping your fingers tightly with a thinner duct tape or anything string-like but with an adhesive for minutes with the tip of the fingers left out. Restricting any blood flow to the tip of your fingers isn't child's play provided you're restrained and cannot do anything. The pain stings like hell. peeling salted sunflower seeds with your bare hands. Had the choice between that and getting my butt beaten with a cable when I screwed up big time when I was like 6 years old. Chose the peeling and I regretted that immensely. It doesn't sound bad at first, but let me tell you, after 1 hour you just want to hold your hands in icy water. Your fingertips get sore, sometimes you prick your skin and the salt dries out your fingers and makes them really sensitive. Not to mention that the salt creeps up your nail bed and hurts like shit, especially if you rip your skin near your fingernails.